A team of scientists in the United Kingdom created genetically modified human embryos in a lab, and the results of the experiment present grave concerns. Science publication 10 reported that using the gene editing technique CRISPR, the scientists deleted a gene from human embryos that had been donated for research. They later realized that these embryos also contained significant unintended edits that could lead to birth defects or other major medical issues. The embryos were destroyed after the experiment. One gene editing expert and professor of molecular and cell biology at the University of California, Berkeley, told the publication 10, quote, "There's no sugarcoating this. This is a restraining order for all genome editors to stay the living daylights away from embryo editing." Joining us now to discuss this alarming story via Skype is Dr. Joseph Meaney, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Joseph, welcome. First off, can you break down what gene editing is exactly and the Catholic Church's teaching on it?
Sure. So gene editing is essentially taking out a gene or splicing another gene in its place. And the CRISPR technology was developed in 2013, but it makes it a lot easier to do that. So we're very much in the beginnings of all this genetic research, but it's becoming a reality. They're able to take out genes and replace them. And of course, the Catholic Church is very, very opposed to any kind of experimentation on human embryos or any person without informed consent. You might be able to use this technology for good, but this is clearly a case where it's being used for bad.
That being said, what's your reaction to this news story?
So, it's quite predictable, I would say. Science, as it emerges into new areas, makes a lot of mistakes. And I don't believe that human embryos, our youngest brothers and sisters, should be sacrificed on the altar of scientific research. It's ridiculous. There are all kinds of animal experimentations that can be done. It's clearly just scientists wanting to experiment and even play God with human beings.
Can you expand on what are some of the potential ramifications of gene editing from a Catholic perspective?
Right. So, one of the terrible things, the dignity of the human person is so profound. We're not allowed to do, whatever we want with our bodies. And we're certainly not allowed to do what we want with our children's bodies, and to give informed consent for them. But it's really terrible what they're talking about with this gene editing for embryos, because it's germline changes, meaning that if these children survive, their children, this will be passed on. It's like changing the biology of the human being, the DNA of human beings.
Wow. Joseph, it is secular scientists raising alarm about this practice. Why do you think that's happening here? That surprised me.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's good to see that there's a universal consensus that this should not be done. In fact, a Chinese scientist who did it in 2018 was universally condemned, and not only that, but he went to jail. So it's great. But the problem is there's a real tendency in modern, secular science, et cetera, to say, well, you can do this, but just don't allow these children to be born. Right? Clone and kill, or edit and kill, and it's just not in keeping at all with a Catholic perspective on the dignity of the human person. We cannot do this to our youngest brothers and sisters.
What do you say then, Joseph, and what's your response to people who say, well, we should embrace science and we should utilize gene editing techniques to help prevent future diseases and family lines? A lot of people believe gene editing is good and actually helpful to our population.
So it is interesting to see, and the Catholic Church would have no objection to, after it's been done in animals, et cetera, and proved to be safe, because we're clearly seeing that it's completely unsafe technology at this point, but to correct genetic diseases of adults or even of children in the womb. But, you can't conceive a child in a laboratory and experiment on them in a laboratory and use the IVF procedures, et cetera. Already that is a grave ethical problem. But you could use this technology certainly for adults, who can give their informed consent, perhaps in the future when it becomes safer to correct genetic problems. That is a real possibility.
These embryos were destroyed following the experiment. What is the human cost of gene editing more broadly?
Sure. It's really tremendous to see the amount of human embryos that are killed. They're estimated to be over 2 million spare embryos thanks to the IVF industry, and science is getting a hold of a lot of these embryos and just doing mass experimentation. This one study here involved 25 human embryos, all of whom were killed. But this is ongoing, and it is a massive problem. I mean, we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of individuals who would, be created in laboratories and killed in laboratories.
You mentioned children being born via IVF and surrogacy, and obviously that's involved here when we're talking about gene editing in labs. Can you expand more there on the Church's teaching when it comes to IVF?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in vitro fertilization was developed in the 1970s. It's essentially taking, sperm and eggs from the two individuals and making conception happen in a laboratory in vitro, in the glass. And then afterwards growing that human embryo and then reimplanting in the womb of the mother or another woman. And all of this, the Church has said very clearly, is against the dignity of the human person, a very grave violation. We all have the right to be conceived and loved by our married mother and father, and raised in that way. That is the Church's vision. Now, some of us, are raised or conceived in ways that are not good, but we maintain our human dignity. So these little embryos, even though they were created in labs, et cetera, are our brothers and sisters. So the Church is very insistent on that point. But the procedure used is a grave violation of the dignity of the human person.
These scientists with gene editing, they're trying to prevent babies being born with disabilities or diseases. But how do we view our brothers and sisters who may have a disability?
Right. So that is a very good point, because we basically have to look at the fact, right, that God creates us in his image and likeness. And even our brothers and sisters who have disabilities have the same human dignity as we do. And there's a terrible kind of utilitarian aspect to the in vitro fertilization industry, really, where they try and look at the genetics of the children that are conceived in the labs and kill all those who may have genetic problems or who might have some kind of sickness. That, again, shows the sign of treating human beings as commodities rather than treating human beings as precious gifts.
Well, as you said, the fact that secular scientists are sounding off on this, maybe there's a hopeful sign that people will see the truth and reality of what's happening here in these laboratories.
I think so too. I think there's a real fear and a realistic fear that we're going to create designer babies, that we're going to change the nature of the human DNA with some of these experimentations. It's a very grave prospect, and I think even our brothers and sisters who don't share our faith can see how big of a problem it is.
Well, we are so grateful for your insight and shedding light on this. Joseph Meaney, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, thank you.
Thank you very much.